Here's my final thought. Last November, a friend took a lump sum retirement payment from the General Electric Company rather than a monthly pension. He put that entire sum into stocks. And why not? The Dow gained 23% in 2019. Just this afternoon, that same friend estimated that he's lost about $100,000 in his retirement portfolio because of the coronavirus. Here's my question. What would my friend have done had he been armed with the same confidential inside information that was given to Senator Richard Burr, who heads the Senate Intelligence Committee? Burr was receiving briefings on the threat of the coronavirus, but rather than sound an alarm, in mid-February, he sold 33 stocks, estimated at between $628,000 and $1.72 million. It was the largest number of stocks he sold since 2016, according to the Washington Post. Here's the point. The senator, in his powerful position, had inside information that my friend didn't have. Not only that, Burr was publicly expressing optimism in the country's ability to manage the coronavirus outbreak when he knew that a storm was a-coming. I'm not judging, but this stinks. Even Republicans are criticizing their colleague. A Fox commentator says he should resign from office. My feeling is Burr has to make this right. He's asking the Senate Ethics Committee to investigate his dumping of all these stocks, and that should just be the start. That's my final thoughts. Let me know what you think. I'm Bruce Johnson. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.